What if your employee performance issues aren't actually employee performance issues at all? What if the problem isn't the person? Because sometimes the thing that's missing isn't accountability, it's clarity. Welcome to the People Side of Business, the podcast for female founders learning how to lead, manage, and scale a team with confidence. I'm Lindsay White, leadership coach, team strategist, and fractional HR expert. And each week, we tackle the real leadership challenges business owners face every day. From difficult conversations and employee performance issues to hiring mistakes, team dynamics, and building a workplace culture that actually supports business growth. Because the truth is, nobody teaches founders how to lead people when their business starts to grow. And figuring it out the hard way can be exhausting. This show is here to change all that. So if you're ready to become a stronger leader, make better people decisions, and build a business that doesn't depend on you carrying everything alone, you're in the right place. Let's do this. Hey, my friend, welcome back to the People Side of Business. I'm so happy to have you here with me this week. Today, we're talking about employee performance issues, and specifically, one of the biggest leadership mistakes I see founders and business owners make pretty regularly. It's when someone on your team starts falling short. They're missing some deadlines, they're dropping some balls, or they're just not performing the way you expected. And it's really easy to assume at that point that you have a people problem. It's easy to think that they're checked out, that they're not taking ownership, or maybe that they're no longer capable of doing the job. But in my experience, that's not always true. In fact, many employee performance issues are actually clarity issues. And one of the phrases I come back to again and again, this is one of my favorite quotes from Brené Brown. You know I love her. And that quote is, clear is kind. And I think the opposite is also true. I think being unclear is unkind. And when we ask someone to step in a role or maybe take on more accountability in the business or to deliver a specific outcome, we, as the founder and the most senior leader, have a responsibility to make sure they understand exactly what we're asking of them. What does success look like? What decisions do they own? Where should they be asking for help? And who should they go to? What outcomes are they responsible for delivering? And how do we want to communicate progress? These things seem obvious in our own heads. We've got it nailed. But they're not that obvious to the person sitting across from us. As leaders, we sometimes assume people know what we need. We assume that they'll just figure it out. We assume that because they are successful, perhaps in one role, that they'll just very naturally be successful in another. And my friends, those assumptions can cause a tremendous amount of struggle and frustration on both sides. So today's episode is really about challenging the belief that poor performance is always related to the team member. Because sometimes what looks like an accountability issue is actually a clarity issue. And I'm going to share a story today about a founder that I worked with that really illustrates this perfectly. But before we dive in, if you are in this space, if you are feeling frustrated and overwhelmed and really ticked off with someone in your business who is not performing, I have a very practical tool that's going to help you really get clear on those expectations, define ownership, really articulate the communication rhythms that you need and what success looks like for your team. And it's called the Role Clarity Guide. And I'm going to link it for you in my show notes so that you can grab it and follow along and use it with your team. It's designed to help you create the clarity that you need so that you can communicate that to your team so they can deliver for you. And also, if you haven't listened to episode 2 of the People Side of Business, that would be a great episode to add to your playlist. It's called Avoiding Difficult Conversations is Hurting Your Leadership. And the truth is, these two things actually work very well together. We need to have these conversations and be clear so that we can really lead our team effectively and they can deliver for us. Okay, so let me get to the story here. This is a founder who came to me a while ago. We've been working together, and she was really frustrated about an employee performance issue. This employee had been a star performer for her, and she felt this was someone who was really reliable, proactive, and just really was consistent on delivering results. She was so pleased with this person's performance. And because they were performing so well, the founder promoted them into a new, larger role with increased accountability. And for a while, everything seemed to be going fine. And suddenly, what the founder started to notice is things were starting to slip. Projects weren't moving forward the way they should have been. The communication with this person became really inconsistent, and deadlines were getting missed. Deliveries for clients were starting to slip. And she was feeling really, really frustrated, overwhelmed with this, quite confused about what was going on here. Honestly, she was actually pretty angry about it when we started working together. She just couldn't understand how someone who had been performing so well was suddenly really struggling and just not talking about it. And as the founder and I worked through the situation, I asked her a question that really made her pause. And I said, "What did you do to set them up for success in their new role?" And it took her a moment. And then she replied and said, "Honestly, I thought they'd just be able to handle it." And that moment was striking. There were some things in that moment that became very clear to me and to her. Nobody had actually defined the role. It was all living in her head. And she hadn't really clearly articulated what the ownership and the decision-making authority was, what success would look like in this new space, what expectations she had around communication rhythms. The founder had assumed. And what happened on the other side? Her employee was left guessing. Both of them were frustrated. Both of them were feeling a little defeated. Both of them were feeling pretty overwhelmed at the situation and what to do about it. And what looked like an employee performance issue on the outside was actually a leadership clarity issue. And I think that's really key here. And this is where I want to challenge the belief that this founder had and that so many founders carry. We assume that because someone excels in one role, they will just very naturally excel in another. But those two things are different, my friends. Being an individual contributor, for example, does not automatically make someone a great manager. If they're in a very technical role, it doesn't automatically mean they're going to be able to lead effectively. And being successful in one environment or one space does not automatically prepare someone for a completely different set of expectations. And yet we make that assumption all the time. And then when performance drops, we immediately start focusing on that employee and that something's wrong with them. Instead, what we should be asking ourselves is, have I actually created enough clarity for this person to succeed? And have I checked in with them on that? Have I communicated my expectations to them in a way they can understand? Have I defined ownership? What belongs to them and where do they need further approvals? Have I really explained what success looks like so that they know what they're trying to achieve? And have I created the space and the opportunity for really great feedback and really great support from me? These are the leadership questions we need to be asking ourselves. And often what happens is these questions reveal what is really happening, especially when we're right in the middle of it. And I want to say here, I know that it can feel really challenging to slow down and spend a little time thinking about this, especially when you're right in the middle of it, when client deliverables are not happening on time, when expectations are not being met, when you feel like you do not know what is going on with this person. And so I want you to know, I really appreciate that this can feel challenging. But the other side of asking these questions creates so much clarity and renewed confidence that it is absolutely worth it. One of the biggest misconceptions that I see around accountability, especially in small, rapidly growing businesses, is that leaders think accountability starts when something is going wrong, and it doesn't. The accountability starts long before that, and it really starts with those expectations up front. People can't be accountable for expectations that were never clearly communicated. They can't take ownership of responsibilities that were not well defined in the first place. And they cannot hit targets that were never explained. They're not mind readers, my friends. Our teams are awesome. I'm sure you all have incredible people working for you. They do not have crystal balls. And as founders, that's what often happens is we've got this all in our head and we don't articulate it clearly so that others can really pick it up and run with it. And this is where the clearest kind becomes such an important leadership principle. Because when we are unclear, we are being unkind. We are actually doing them a disservice. They want to deliver for us. They want the business to be successful. They want our clients to be well looked after. And when we leave people guessing, we're asking them to navigate without a map. And when we're frustrated that they don't arrive at the destination we had in our mind, that's not accountability. It's that they're living in ambiguity. They don't see the destination on the map they don't have. And I'm telling you that ambiguity is one of the fastest ways to create performance problems on your team. And this is exactly why I created that role clarity guide that's in the show notes for you. It is designed to help you walk through these questions. You know, what's this role? What am I expecting? What are the decisions these people get to make? What communication do we need to exchange? What do I need to hear from them and when? And what does success look like? What are the outcomes that we need? Because when those things are clear, accountability becomes easier. So let's talk now a little bit more about ownership, because this is one of the biggest leadership gaps I see. When founders tell me they want people to take more ownership, and I'll tell you, I hear this all the time. I'm always asking them the same question. What exactly do you mean by ownership? And usually there's quite a prolonged pause because ownership sounds obvious until you actually try to define it. And for one leader, ownership means keeping projects moving without constant reminders. But for another leader, it means making decisions independently. And for a third person, it could mean proactively communicating risks before they become problems. The challenge here, my friends, is that your team doesn't automatically know your definition. Again, they're not mind readers. And ownership isn't a personality trait. It's an agreement. It's something we create together through clarity. So I want you to think about it this way. If someone is driving a car, they need to know where they're going. They need to know the rules of the road. They need to know how much freedom they have to choose the route. The same thing is true inside your business. When someone steps into a role, they need to know, what decisions can I make on my own? What decisions do I need to bring back to you as the founder? What decisions need what level of approval? And what am I fully accountable for? Where am I contributing, but not absolutely and ultimately responsible for the outcome? Without answers to these kinds of questions, people spend an enormous amount of time and energy trying to figure out what's safe. And when people are uncertain, they hesitate. Not because they're incapable, because they're trying to avoid making mistakes and disappointing you. And I often see founders interpret that hesitation as a lack of confidence or a lack of accountability. But many times it's actually a lack of clarity. The employee is trying to navigate a situation where the boundaries just have not been well established. And my friends, here is the hard truth. If you've ever found yourself saying something to the effect of, well, they should just know. That to me is absolutely a signal that more clarity is required. Because what feels obvious to us isn't always obvious to someone else. especially when they're stepping into a new role or a bigger role or more responsibility. So before you ask someone to take more ownership, you need to ask yourself, have I clearly defined where the ownership lives? Because ownership grows in environments where the expectations are clear and everybody is on the same page. Now let's talk about what I believe is the most overlooked leadership responsibility of all: defining success. And I do this with all of my clients. I am relentless because this gets missed. Most leaders have a picture of what success looks like in their head. The problem is that picture is going to stay in your head. And then we become frustrated and overwhelmed and sometimes angry with our employees because they don't deliver what we're imagining. Yeah, because it's in our imagination. So here's an example. Imagine for a moment that I tell an employee, I need this project completed by the end of the month. Sounds straightforward, right? I mean, that's something I think many of us would say. But what does completed mean? Does it mean drafted? Does it mean reviewed? Does it mean implemented? Does it mean approved by any stakeholders? Does it mean presented to the team? There are dozens and dozens of possible interpretations of what the word done or complete means. And every single one of them can create real frustration if we are not aligned. Success needs to be made visible. When I work with leaders, I encourage them to answer questions like, what does great performance look like in this role? What outcomes am I expecting? How will we know we're successful? What measurable indicators tell us we're on track? What behaviors are important here and what standards matter? So the more clearly we can define success, the easier it becomes for people to move forward with it. And this is especially important when someone has recently been promoted or they've been given greater accountability, because often they're trying to succeed using the rules from their previous role. But the rules may have changed. The expectations may have changed, and the outcomes most certainly have changed. And unless we make those changes explicit, we are setting people up to fail. Remember, people can't hit targets they can't see. That's why defining success is one of the kindest things we can do as a leader. All right. So the final lesson I want to leave you with today is about curiosity, because curiosity might be one of the most underutilized leadership skills. And when performance starts falling short, our brains naturally move towards judgment. We start telling ourselves stories. They're disengaged. They don't care. They're not capable. They're totally dropping the ball. They're not in the game anymore. Now, sometimes those stories are true, but many times they're not. And the problem is when we jump straight to conclusions, we stop gathering information and leadership. Our leadership requires a lot of information. And this is where I want to connect back to episode 2 on the difficult conversations, because difficult conversations become dramatically easier when we enter them with curiosity, when we are open to the discussion, instead of feeling frustrated and leading with accusations. So instead of saying, why aren't you getting this done? We can lead with curiosity and say, help me understand what's getting in the way. Instead of saying things like, you're not taking ownership, we can ask, where does this feel uncertain? Or where do you have questions? Instead of, something like, your performance is slipping, we can ask, what support do you need that you're not getting right now? And I want you to notice the difference in the approach. One approach creates defensiveness, and it makes the conversation right from the start sound really harsh. The other creates dialogue, and dialogue actually creates understanding. So in the story I shared today, the real breakthrough happened because the founder got curious. That was the work we did together, was actually helping her move past the frustration and some anger, to a place where she could get really deeply curious. Instead of continuing to blame the employee, she became willing to explore their own. Let me try it again. Instead of continuing to blame the employee, the founder became willing to explore their own contribution to the problem. Because, my friends, I always believe it takes two to tango, right? There's more than enough blame to go around when a situation goes sideways. So the founder did her work, and she really recognized there was space for her contribution. And that's one of the most powerful shifts we can make as a leader. Not asking, what's wrong with this person? But asking, what am I missing? What am I not seeing yet? Because leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to ask better questions. And when those better questions reveal that the problem wasn't accountability at all, it was clarity. And the great part was, once we got clear on the expectations, the ownership, the communication, and what those success metrics were, things changed pretty rapidly. The founder started having regular check-ins. They set up a rhythm, a cadence. The employee knew what decisions they owned and where they needed to go to the founder to get approval and to get help. Success was clearly defined and everybody agreed on it. And the communication really started to improve dramatically. And within a matter of just a few weeks, the employee was thriving again. Not because they suddenly became more capable, but because they finally had the clarity they needed to succeed. And on the other side, as a founder, my client felt more calm, more confident, better able to communicate what she was thinking and her vision, not just to the team member that had been underperforming, but to her entire team. And in fact, that was deeply engaging for them. And it really helped them see how they could impact and make a difference so the business could scale even more effectively. And ultimately, isn't that what we all want? So if you're currently dealing with an employee performance issue, I want to leave you with some questions. Because before you assume that it's a people problem, you actually need to ask yourself, do we have a clarity problem here? Are these expectations really well defined? Have we actually defined the ownership? And am I really being clear about what success looks like here? And also, have I created the communication channels that are needed for this person to thrive and so that I get the information that I need? Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do as leaders isn't to demand more accountability. It's actually to create more clarity. And remember, clear is kind and unclear is unkind. So my friend, if today's episode resonated with you, make sure you download that Role Clarity Guide. It's linked in the show notes, and it'll walk you through the same questions that I've asked here today that you actually really need to spend some time to think about. And that's going to help you create more clarity and more accountability on your team. And if difficult conversations are the thing you've been avoiding, you know you need to have one, then go back and listen to episode 2 of the People Side of Business. And it is going to help you engage in some of those crunchy conversations very, very effectively. And of course, when we pair those challenging conversations with the clarity we've discussed today, you can completely change how you lead your team. And I know you can do it. So thanks for being here with me today. And I can't wait to see you on the next episode. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The People Side of Business. If this conversation resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the show and share it with other founders in your world. And keep coming back each week for practical leadership strategies to help you lead, manage, and scale your team with more confidence. And if you're sitting in the middle of people challenges right now, whether it's leadership, team dynamics, hiring, culture, or difficult conversations, and you're realizing you don't want to figure it out alone, I'd love to support you. You can book a leadership strategy session with me through the link in the show notes or at highvoltageleadership.ca. I'd love to hear what you learned from today's episode, so come connect with me on Instagram at highvoltleadership or on LinkedIn. And remember, The people side of business is the business. I'll see you next time.
This podcast is produced, mixed, and edited by Cardinal Studio. For more information about how to start your own podcast, please visit www.cardinalstudio.co or email Mike at mike@cardinalstudio.co. You can also find the details in the show notes.